think the ambition of the space is still way too small. And that's honestly what's killing the industry more than anything else.
Austin, thank you so much for being with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I feel very honored. I feel like I'm in the presence of a celebrity. Google will call you an internet personality. How do you feel about that?
I don't really know why.
You don't know why?
It's just a funny label. I feel like we barely know what job titles should be in this industry, let alone how to like label people in it. I think for me, the sort of internet personality type label is usually for folks who don't have a real job. You know, it's like, oh, this person writes a newsletter or something like that. And that's why I think it's always been kind of funny that there's that tag there. 'Cause it's like, oh, I have a real job. I had one before at Solana. I've got one now at DoubleZero.
You do have a real job, pretty important one too, for that matter.
Yeah.
Which made you become an internet personality?
I think a lot of that, I didn't have a particularly large Twitter following before Solana. And so I think a lot of it is just due to the rise of that ecosystem and being someone who was active and vocal and, sharing the good stuff and the bad stuff and everything throughout the last kind of 4.5 years of that.
I think that actually brings me to a question. What do you think, maybe you know specifically, but if not, what do you think made you grow this following?
It was entirely accidental, I would say, and very organic from that perspective. I think there's a lot of people who are doing engineering are too busy doing engineering to communicate out what they're talking about. And a lot of people who are trying to communicate stuff from engineering don't understand the engineering at all. And so you get a lot of kind of bad Twitter take influencer accounts. Again, people are like, I read a newsletter, and most of what they end up sending out is fairly wrong or just doesn't really hold water from what the engineers are talking about. And so I think a lot of just the reason I got following on Twitter was my job initially was a lot of communicating out what are engineers working on at Solana, what products are we building, these types of things. And people were just very curious about what that was and how these things, happened. And running the response during an outage too, also people start to be like, oh, okay, this is a voice I should be paying attention to for things good and bad happening in the ecosystem.
So Solana's downtime built your following?
In part, sure. I mean, it did for a bunch of engineers, it did a bunch of other stuff. The greatest way to get 1 million followers on your status account is to go offline. It's the Solana status account gained a lot of followers. This is never a good thing.
So it was happening on purpose.
Yeah,
that's
right.
What we're learning today.
Yeah, no. But with a lot of this stuff, I think after the collapse of FTX too, there was, the internet does internet things, right? Is the best way to contextualize this. There was a whole group of Solana NFT traders that tried to get me fired after the collapse of FTX because I was one of the very vocal people saying, no, the foundation's role is not to bail out a bunch of these projects that never really had any type of product market fit. It's to help the products that have revenue, that the projects like Jupiter, like Jito, folks who are actually building real stuff. And there were plenty of NFT folks building real stuff too, but a lot of them were just we have a community and maybe we'll be at a lunchbox someday. And even Bored Ape Yacht Club couldn't make that work. Basically, Pudgy Penguins is the only one that's been able to land that plane. And so no, it didn't make any sense for the foundation to put its money towards a bunch of projects that didn't seem to have much of a future. That did not make me the most popular person on Twitter for a few months.
It made you popular in some way.
Well, sure. Yes.
It did. So you were at Solana Labs at first?
Yes.
Very early days, 2021, I believe.
Yeah. Joined, yeah.
What were you leading at first? Communications? You were on the market?
No, so I started off, I was hired at the very end of 2020, back when, so I was working at Bison Trails at the time on the product and platform team.
Which was acquired by Coinbase.
They were acquired by Coinbase and they became Coinbase Cloud. And I was talking to Raj and Toli about a job, and it wasn't really Solana was 14 people back then. There weren't hard job descriptions. And so it was basically do something that's product related and marketing related and sort of maybe a bit of a chief of staff role, and we'll just kind of figure it out. And so when I joined, there were 2 people working in marketing, One of them left pretty soon after I joined, and so it was really just Maddie. And now Maddie has gone on to run Coliseum, which runs all the hackathons for Solana. Like, he was like the complete hackathon, guru over there on how to do these. It was that still to this day, I think Coliseum throws the best structure for hackathons out there. The job was basically like find ways to be useful in marketing and product. And so some of the early stuff I worked on was the stake pool program for Solana, which now runs all the stake pools on the network, as well as Metaplex. There were 6 of us that originally did all the work for Metaplex. Stephen went on to, found that company, and a bunch of the rest of us just kept working at Solana at the time. But yeah, that was another really big thing in the early days. And then the Breakpoint conference, there were 3 of us, Ryan, Ross, and myself, who organized pretty much the entire Breakpoint conference year 1, which was crazy because we were like, the vaccines just came out, and we were like, could we get everyone to go to Lisbon for a conference? And we built the conference for 2,000 people. We thought there was no way we'd get 2,000 people there. And 6 weeks before, we were totally sold out, which was just this crazy experience. But that was kind of the thing where we were getting Solana was in a run-up, all these things. It kind of got to the point where it was like, we need someone to run comms. And I've been doing some of that before. But I have no formal comms training. I've never run comms before or something like that. But, Raj has this way of just throwing people into situations and be like, you'll either figure it out or you won't. It was actually an incredibly good quality for a leader. So I ended up running comms for about 18 months.
Thrown in the water, learned how to swim.
Yeah.
And swam beautifully.
Yeah, this was the run-up, and then the sort of thing we thought was the bear market, and then after the collapse of FTX, the actual bear market. Yes, so it was a rough time, but it was also a great time. So,
how is the world different being strategy from comms?
So comms is I would say almost everyone I've ever met or heard about who works in comms does comms wrong. Okay. Comms in Web 2 is kind of like the public information officer at the police department. Like, it's the dude whose job is to tell you the police did nothing wrong, right? It's like comms is basically the same thing. It's like their job is to tell you that like everything's incredible. Like, this company is like, why would you ever think something so like this? There's this great moment in when Facebook was launching live streams when a journalist asked Mark, what happens the first time someone like kills someone on Facebook Live? And the response was like, oh, that's so negative. Haven't you, we're building a platform to connect people. And like, that's comms for the most part, right? It's like, that's a legitimate question. Like, people are terrible. Like, something bad is definitely going to happen on Facebook Live.
Yes. It does with everything.
Right. It's nothing problem with, not a Facebook problem. It's a TikTok problem. It's a Twitter problem. It's a YouTube problem. But like, it's a legitimate question when you're asking a live streaming platform. And so comms in Web3 a lot of times has that same kind of gaslighting quality to it. We're trying to we're trying to convince you of something that isn't actually true. And so I think one of the most important things in running comms is to be honest about what's going on. And of course, there's always some spin on everything. But at the end of the day, like, people's BS detector in crypto is very high, especially after all the rugs, all the scams that we've all been through. And so I think it's really important to treat people as fundamentally smart. And like, so this is a long way of getting to what's your difference between how is comms and strategy different. Like, I think when you're running comms well, it is a role that advances the average IQ of everyone on the blockchain. Like, it makes them more aware of what's going on, and it educates them about how this stuff actually works. Strategy is very different. There's a bit of that that's always external. So when I was running comms, I would be sort of involved at the concepting phase of a product or a project, and then like the end phase. Most comms only comes in at the end. Yeah. For like a normal company like a Coinbase or something, comms is like, hey, we're launching this thing. How do you think we should launch it? And for Solana, it was like on the ideation phase, like, how are we going to think through both all the positives and negatives that could go on with this thing, and how, from like a comms perspective, and how do we build the thing that we can basically create the most genuine excitement and interest around? Then people go off and build the thing, and then you come back in at the end. Strategy is much more holistic over the whole thing. It's not responsible, strictly speaking, for any one deliverable in any of those components, but it's sort of like high level, making sure it all kind of works together and runs. You can sort of think of like a good head of strategy in an organization like Solana or any really layer one blockchain. They're almost like your product owner, except there's no product owner because like it's built by everyone. But there are these like, I think it's really important for every organization that's like an L1 blockchain to have like a professional skunk. Like someone who is going to say like, I don't think that's going to fly. Like that, I get why you all think this because you all work at this company, but like this is not going to land well with the market.
Someone who's questioning decisions, a skeptic.
Yes. And you can't just, being a skeptic is easy. You have to be a skeptic that has some amount of optimism, that can say like, there's a way we can do this right, but we have to change these things about it. The best way that I would sort of describe this is like, it's like defensive driving, like you have to anticipate what the moves are going to be made around you. I think that you saw a lot of like tech CEOs kind of crash out in 2020 and 2021 when like, they're like, oh, the media is so unfair to us. It's like, no, like they're telling a story and that story can be adversarial or not, but it's your fault for not explaining what you're actually doing. And it's this kind of very funny thing where a lot of these folks, they want to build a thing and they want the thing talked about in the way they want to talk about, but they don't want to talk to anyone else about the thing.
Yeah.
And that gets very, very difficult.
You are now co-founder of a protocol called DoubleZero.
Yeah.
I want to go a little bit into what does DoubleZero solve for, and then I want to learn about what are the experiences at Solana through different markets as well.
Yeah.
That really shaped the way you're going about building DoubleZero today.
Yeah. So at its core, DoubleZero is an attempt to rebuild the internet from first principles. And it's to rebuild it for high-performance distributed systems like blockchain in mind. And this kind of came through the work we were doing with the FireDancer team and Jump on this new validator client for Solana. And the process of realizing that we can build this incredibly high-performant validator client, but it's not going to be able to reach its full potential on the public internet. And that seemed like a problem. And this would sort of keep coming up. We talked to Kevin Bowers and we talked to folks, and they would sort of, this analogy of like a Ferrari stuck in traffic sort of kept coming out, which is like, yeah, it's nice to own a sports car that can go 200 miles an hour. But, if you're stuck in traffic at 45 miles an hour, like you kind of wasted $200,000 on a car.
Wasting potential.
Yes. And so the question was like, how do we solve that bottleneck and that problem? And, Hyperliquid solved that bottleneck and that problem by putting everything in the same data center in Tokyo. And that's a totally legitimate answer to that problem if the type of product you're trying to build is a perp-stex, if it is something that's like very hyper-localized. If what you're trying to do is run a globally distributed blockchain, crashing the node count doesn't really seem to make sense. And so the question was, could we build this new internet? Can we build a private high-performance network with multiple independent contributors that has all the cryptographic assurances that we know and like in blockchain, but can basically outperform the public internet and use technologies that aren't available in the public internet? And that became the DoubleZero project.
Why is it called the N1?
We wanted to be very clear that this is not a layer 1 or a layer 2. This is not a smart contract environment. It's not competitive with Aptos or Solana or Sui or Monad or Mega ETH or anything like that. It is meant to be base layer neutral infrastructure at the network layer.
Base layer.
Yes. So this is like, if you think about like the computer science stack of the world, there's like 7 layers. Everything in blockchain is like layer 5, 6, and 7. It's a very, very high up. Like you can run an Aptos node on lots of different types of hardware. You can have lots of different amounts of RAM or CPUs or whatever, and it all just like works because it's built at a very high level of software abstraction. DoubleZero is like a layer, an OSI layer 1, 2, and 3 network. So it's like the physical cables in the ground and like the electrical signals and the protocols that run on top of them. It's really, really low level. And that means it can support all certain types of systems on it, whether they're blockchain systems or non-blockchain systems.
Kevin Bowers, I was speaking with him right before you mentioned him. One of the questions I asked him, which was related to Shelby product, which we're going to get into, essentially, my question to him was, why was no one building this before?
Yeah.
One of his answers was that it probably wouldn't have been possible to reach the performance that Shelby is reaching
Yeah.
without products like DoubleZero.
Yeah.
So as you mentioned, it's one of the fundamental building blocks to being able to reach performance with a product like Shelby. What is your hopes for the improvement of performance on a product like Shelby from the DoubleZero perspective?
Yeah, there's kind of probably two different ways to answer this. So the first is that the storage nodes that hold all the data for Shelby, they're all going to be connected via the DoubleZero network to one another. And so they're going to be able to transmit data back and forth at much faster data rates than the public internet supports. And they're also going to be able to transmit with sort of known latencies. So there's this whole thing that happens on the public internet where if you've got a server in New York and a server in Tokyo and they're talking to each other, there's a round trip time it takes the data to get there. That number actually fluctuates quite rapidly, and this is called jitter. So your ping time is your latency between one server and another server. The jitter is if I sample that 100 times, how consistent is that number? On the public internet, it's a very, very wide range. It might take you 300 milliseconds one time and 900 milliseconds the other time. And all that variability in between is a real killer for any high-performance system. Because not only then is data arriving at different times and out of order, and you have to kind of reassemble all that data, but I don't know if your server didn't respond to me because it's offline, or I just have to wait for the data to be retrieved. And so when a RPC on Shelby makes a request from a storage server on Shelby, they're going to know, oh, I should get this back in a known number of milliseconds. I shouldn't have to be waiting for a long period of time to see that. And so yeah, there's faster connections and more reliable connections, and then also just 10 times to 20 times the amount of bandwidth that you can get on the public internet.
What made you want to look into this problem and solve for it? Because it's quite different from what you were doing.
It is. It's pretty different than Solana. There's kind of two components to this. One is like I'd been at Solana for about coming up on 4.5 years, and at that point, you kind of have to ask yourself, am I going to be here for another 6 to 10, or am I going to go try and do my own thing? And I had the itch to be a founder, and this idea just couldn't get out of my head. And also, like, you have a clock on becoming a founder, I think.
You think there's a clock?
Yes. I think...
Do you believe it's perishable?
Like you can expire?
Yes.
Absolutely, yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, this is like, it's kind of just like basic biology of like people slow down when they get older. And so if you are gonna go found a company and do the grind necessary to really do that, it's a lot easier to do in your 30s than your 40s.
Okay.
Yes. And it doesn't mean you can't do it in your 40s, but if you haven't already done it in your 30s, like the number of first-time founders as they get older who are successful goes down dramatically.
That's a very interesting stat.
Yeah, I mean, it's similar to how like a lot of 18-year-old founders don't do particularly well usually, but for different reasons. They have all the drive, the motivation, they have none of the experience. So there's kind of a sweet spot in there where most successful companies are not founded by 18, 20, and 22-year-olds. They're founded by people in their 30s. And so part of this was also just like, like a bunch of other personal life stuff. Like you have periods in your life when you have maximal opportunity, and you have periods in life when you have lower opportunity. And so the stars kind of align to say, like, if I'm going to do this, I want to go do this now.
Did you always want to be a founder?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
I think if you'd asked me in 2023, I would have told you I'll probably never be a founder.
Oh, so it's not so long ago.
No. I mean, this is kind of I think for me, I was one of those people who looked around at people who were founders and would say, I don't think I've had that much conviction. Like, you have to have an unreasonable amount of conviction and belief in your own idea to go do this. Like, I have no doubt when we started this that we'd be able to build a new internet and get this thing launched and like launch the DoubleZero network. But that was not a consensus opinion. right? If we talk to investors, we talk to journalists, we talk to all sorts of folks, and then instead of saying to them like, yeah, we're going to go build a new internet and we can do this in less than a year, they're like, no, like, I don't believe you. And so if you don't have that feeling of an idea that you're like, I gotta make this thing real, and I have like just a unwavering belief that I'm going to be able to do it, like, don't become a founder. Like, it is truly a psychotic endeavor.
I always felt like if you are not convinced, you can't convince others.
And everyone can tell. Like, if you're not convinced by the idea you're pitching as a founder, like, people know.
Yeah,
they can tell.
Wait, when did I guess what did this conviction about fixing the internet almost, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I've had this for years. I've been talking about this problem for years, basically since the Fire Dancer engineers started talking about it, and I started digging in. But I'm a guy from crypto. What do I know about building high-performance distributed networks? Again, it's a truly very different set of skills. And so the thing that changed it from this is something I'm passionate about to this is a company that I want to leave my very comfortable, very well-paying job at Solana to go do was meeting my co-founders.
Okay.
Yeah. And both of them come from the high-performance networking world. Mateo Ward, worked for Global. His first job was working for Global Crossing, which is one of the first companies to run fiber all around the world. He had, managed and founded his own telecom carrier, servicing like Latin America, which he sold off to another company.
So you had been a founder before.
Yeah, he'd been a founder before, but also he had all the industry relationships and connections that were sort of necessary for this. And then Andrew McConnell, spent the last 7 years working at Jump, building their high-frequency trading network. And before that, he worked for one of the major stock exchanges. So he'd seen sort of the exchange perspective and the trading firm perspective and built a global high-performance network before. And, the three of us just kind of got together and we're like, I think the time's kind of ready to do this. Like, Solana needed it, but you could also see that there would be all these new up-and-coming fast networks that were also going to need the exact same characteristics of a private high-performance network that DoubleZero is able to provide.
So the start quite literally aligned.
Yeah.
In every single possible way.
Yes.
Going back to the Shelby products a little bit, why do you think, aside from, or maybe that's the answer to you, is a product like DoubleZero didn't exist, so we couldn't build something like Shelby?
Yeah.
I guess my question is, why do you think no one else has been trying to build a product like this?
So there's a few different reasons. One is that this is not a particularly well understood topic. Like, building hot storage file systems for fast read and write access is a very hard problem. Like, you look at all the stuff that Google has open sourced over like its history as a company, its AI models, it's all this stuff. The one thing they've never open sourced is their file system. The thing that made Google was not just their ability to index the web, but have a file storage system that allowed them to index the web. And without that key innovation about how they build their storage systems, most of what Google does wouldn't be possible. That skill set is limited to a very few companies, and Jump is one of those, right? They built this internal storage system for themselves years ago because they were running into the same types of large data problems that cloud storage providers run into and all these other folks. So there's a little bit of this just knowledge basis. The second is that you need a really fast global network to make something like Shelby work. IPFS runs just fine over the public internet because it's doing something different. It's an archival storage system. The minute you need really fast data retrieval, you're running into network limitations, not just server limitations. And that's kind of, I think that's like a main component, not on the economic side. There's a whole separate piece on the economic side, but on the technical side, you need the file system storage architecture that's willing to be open sourced. And then you also need a fast network to connect all these nodes so they can actually service data really quickly.
So Aptos, in that case, being the network that's building Shelby.
So on the network side, I literally mean like the bandwidth connection.
Oh, the bandwidth.
Like literally, if you're trying to stream 100 gigabits of data, you can't just dump that onto the public internet and say like, good luck, here's the data, right? It's sort of the difference between like, you can have warehouses, but if every person has to show up at the warehouse and pick up their stuff, that's a pretty inefficient way to distribute stuff. There's a reason that like every warehouse in the world is a fleet of delivery vehicles going in and out of it, is you need to get the data to where people actually need to go. And that's kind of what DoubleZero can provide here. On the smart contract side, there's a whole bunch of stuff about how you can interface with Shelby via smart contracts and paying for data access and stuff like that too. The work we do with Shelby is very much more on the data transport side. It's not on the smart contract layer side. But yeah, there's a ton of stuff that all interfaces there.
Right before we were chatting, you talked to me about the economy isn't working when it comes to, I guess, or AWS, Google Cloud, data storage. What do you mean by that?
So if you look at how most of the big cloud providers bill today, they bill based on moving data in and out of their systems. So compute is very low cost. Operations to modify data and all these things are fairly low cost. But if you want to take data from AWS and put it in GCP, they'd both charge you a lot to do that. And so if Shelby were to try and run via like storage nodes run on AWS and GCP and all these places, they would run into really massive bandwidth billing costs, because every time there's a read or write request that leaves that region, they'd be billed for it. And so the economics of how bandwidth is billed on these big cloud providers would just make it infeasible for Shelby from an economic perspective. Even if from a server storage cost perspective, maybe a virtualized server is just good, a bare metal server from a cost perspective, but it's all the data transport around that will become expensive.
Two things. Who would benefit the most from a product like DoubleZero?
Yeah.
And same question, who would benefit the most from a product like Shelby?
So for DoubleZero, it's any applications that need both low latency and high bandwidth. Ideally both, but it can be just one of the two. So like the Ethereum L1, not going to benefit from DoubleZero, but Flash bots, the node system on Ethereum, definitely could benefit from DoubleZero. So it kind of goes a bit back and forth. On the Shelby side, it's really optimized for data that has to be read multiple times and read quickly. So that can be everything from, video content that's maybe stored up there to one of the projects that, I think a bunch of folks at Shelby are going to work on with some of the Solana folks is storing the 400 terabytes of Solana archival data on something like Shelby. So if you are, on Solana and you want to run some data analysis and you're like, hey, I need to stream, I want to replay the FTX collapse and see how, data actually moved in transactions, that you could just query Shelby, pay for it, and just have a stream data coming to you for local processing. And that's kind of a really great example where 400 terabytes is a lot of data. It's too much that anyone would have it in their house. You can put it on a cloud provider, but then every time someone wants to access it, they're paying egress costs from the cloud to access it. If it's on Shelby and on DoubleZero, something like that is much cheaper to access because the bandwidth costs are not even, it could be archival data too. Any amount of data that you need to pull in to anywhere in the world, that's kind of where these things start to become an economics of scale situation.
Have an impact, a tangible impact. I kind of want to go back a little bit into you and you as a founder.
Sure.
I think a lot of people, especially in Web3, are trying to be founders. I say trying because to me, you're not a founder unless you have a product.
Yeah.
Ideas is great, but it doesn't make you a founder. What do you think makes you, are the best qualities that make you a great founder? Don't be humble.
No, I don't know. I mean, I think that's...
You probably see these qualities in your co-founders, right?
Yeah, but I mean, we're all a very different co-founding group.
I'm sure. And that's why I'm asking you specifically, because you need people who are going to be complementary to each other in order for it to work. What's yours?
One of the things I tend to think through well are the long-term implications of short-term decisions. This has kind of always been something from the days of Solana that I focus on trying to do things conceptually the right way and have strong sort of philosophical underpinnings on how we approach problems. This meant at Solana, my whole philosophy, which, was to build things as low level as possible and as generic as possible. Okay. And this would show up time and time again where, like, when we built Metaplex, there was this whole idea of, like, what people really want are auctions and custom storefronts for NFTs. Turns out no one wanted auctions, no one wanted custom storefronts, everyone wanted NFTs. And because we built this as a very sort of low-level framework that was very modular, 95% of what we developed originally for Metaplex was just thrown out by the community pretty much instantly. That 5% of the token metadata program, the way to make NFTs on Solana, took off like wildfire and became the billions and billions of dollar boom, which was the NFT boom on Solana. And that wouldn't have happened if we'd built a fully integrated product. And so a lot of the stuff that I think about and I think push my team on and other teams on is to think long-term about the implementation of the architecture decisions you're making nowadays. And also think about how you can build things in ways that people that are smarter than you can come in and say, I actually just want this one little component. I have this like crazy thing I'm gonna go build.
Interesting. I'm not gonna take too much, so I'm gonna wrap up with these questions. What in Web3 right now do you feel like is missing that needs to be built? Either it's being built not properly, or you don't see being built that you feel like would be great products to have.
I mean,
No.
I think the ambition of the space is still way too small.
Okay.
And that's honestly what's killing the industry more than anything else. It's that people are thinking about things in way too small-minded, and the scale they're going after is still pretty small. Like, people thought Solana was crazy for aiming for 1 million transactions per second. 1 million transactions per second is like barely enough to run one stock exchange. Like, if we actually think this technology is going to compete with centralized systems across the board, we need to massively raise our ambition and expectations for what this technology should do.
Too small-minded. I feel like people think in very short-term in Web3 as a whole.
Yeah. There's a lot of fake it till you make it. There's a lot of short-term mindset. There's a lot of sort of resting on your laurels, and I think it's a big problem in this space. I think there's a lot of people that get rich and then they stop being as ambitious. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with getting rich. Like, getting rich is great, but like we need to move those people out of operational roles when they get to a place where they're not as like hungry and driven and ready anymore. And that's hard, right? I think we probably need to graduate a lot of people in a lot of companies up to advisors or something like that. There's some founders that really need to go be executive chairman. Yeah. Like, you gotta Larry and Sergey some folks at some point if you really want to keep the pressure on and keep things developing. Bringing in that sort of new energy and new blood is important.
I feel like in Web3, the way with which it's easy to access capital is a blessing and a curse at the same time because of that reason.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, the other piece too is just as an industry, we've rejected government regulation, which is good, but we haven't supplemented our own.
Well, now the market moves based on regulations.
Yeah, which, granted all markets do, right? But I think the difficulty is like the traditional financial space created FINRA for a reason. FINRA insulates them from regulatory action. Like, it would be really awesome if all the exchanges got together and came up with common definitions for the words that they use. That would be like a really good start. And then we could maybe have common disclosure practices where everyone has them in the same format. Like, they're very basic stuff that would just help the industry start to move forwards a bit on that front and start to establish better trust. I think what Blockworks started to do with transparency scores is nice. But those have not really been adopted by too many other folks.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's very little incentive to do it.
We'll go back to incentives.
Yeah. Like, a permissionless, anonymous, decentralized system has a lot of trouble creating intrinsic moral structures. The same way a society full of anarchists has trouble creating intrinsic moral structures, right? And what happens when you create an anarchic society with no structural rules? They start imposing their own rules and rebuilding, like, basically a feudal system.
Lack of incentives again.
Yeah.
Last question. in today's crypto environment, for people building protocols or running protocols, what do you think the importance of marketing versus the actual underlying tech is? What's the balance there?
You need both. I mean, I think there's so many projects that have said we're going to win because we have great tech, and that's usually not enough. That very strangely was enough for Solana, but I think that's the only example I can truly think of, and that's only because there was no alternatives to Solana. Yeah, like I think that Solana got through the 2022 bear market because there were no other alternatives that were live at the time.
You think that's why?
Yeah, I mean, not the only reason why, but like, well, what we saw basically 0 builders defect from Solana at that time. And I think a lot of those builders truly believed in Solana and believed it would come back very strong after FTX. I think a lot of them looked around and said, even if I wanted to build somewhere else, at the time, there were just no networks anywhere near as performant as Solana. And so that is where, like, if you truly have the best tech by enough of a margin, it makes a difference. If your tech is 20%, 30%, 40%, 70% better, I don't think that's enough. I think that's where you really need marketing and tech to work hand in hand.
Agreed. Last one for real this time, DoubleZero.
Yeah.
What is your hope and vision for the next 12 months versus the next 10 years? Where do you see yourself and the company be?
Yeah, I mean, we've got about a third of Solana running on DoubleZero at the moment. We're expanding out to support more networks, obviously Shelby. It's on that list when Shelby launches, and a bunch of other networks as well. So I think expanding out into more coverage of more blockchains. Would love to get Aptos running on it at some point too. And then, going from there to non-blockchain systems as well.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. I have my DoubleZero pin.
Love it.
With the JPEG logo. Is that the final logo?
Yeah, at least for now. Yeah.
If you have a new one, I'll need a new pin. Thank you so much, Austin, for your time. It was great to have you.
Appreciate it.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.